Ladies and gentlemen, it is week number 4 of this lovely class, and we are into the 1600s. If you look at our maps right there, that's what we really have seen, discovered, understood about the world in this time period. I love ancient maps because it shows the world in a completely different viewpoint than what we're probably used to. When we analyze that, there is like Colorado is not even seen, but it's growing. It's growing by a lot. And you can see here's the world where we can see it. Spain has a lot of territory, but now so does France and England are starting to move over. Africa is starting to be put together, bits and pieces based on who wants what and where. So, as we look at this world, that is the world we are talking about according to the mapping, according to the writing down of different histories. And the reason why we have the map looking like it is thanks to the Renaissance influencing the age of exploration because now people want to see the world, people want to experience it. But then the age of exploration influences this time period because now people want to go and start a new life, take over a brand new area, and basically have new things they didn't really think they could have. So settlers were leaving England, France, Denmark, and the lights of those countries because they saw freedoms, newness, chances that they didn't have in the old world. Age of exploration was conquering. Now we're into the settling. Like it says right there, new world equals new opportunities, and many, many colonies started to be set up all around where the United States, Mexico, South America, and Canada all flourish today. Jamestown and Plymouth are two of those that we will talk. Now, I'm splitting the 1600s into two groups. This week, we're going to talk about some of those famous names, stuff that took place, events. Next week, we'll talk about some of these famous people. We got some good characters to discuss and analyze in that front. So that's how I'm splitting it. And when you do your discussion post, if you want to talk about it in that sense too, I'm 100% in. Otherwise, you can answer that question how you see fit, like always. So, Jamestown, Virginia, the colony right there on that map, is the very first permanent settlement in what we would call the United States from the English point of view. That's their first settlement that they established. John Smith, John Rolfe, Pocahontas. Those are some fancy people that we've heard about in the different Disney movies. They were a part of this time period and this colony. The relationship with natives for Jamestown was shaky. That's to say it in a nice light, a good light. There was no trust, but they did realize trade needed to happen. Both sides attacked. So you can talk about who did it first or who had the right, who not. Both sides attacked, both sides ambushed the other to make sure they could kind of show their strength and kind of push back others. The settlers who arrived in Jamestown didn't do the work. And I think that's kind of what started the shaky relationship off first is these settlers landed there. And that's the key thing. Settlers, not adventurers and thrill seekers, but eventually it was families, women, children, and men coming over. But that first group of settlers didn't do the work. They weren't prepared. They would rather just kind of sit back, kind of see the land. They didn't want to put in the hard labor that they needed to establish a colony. And so, with no preparation, they went through a lot of leaders back and forth of, hey, we can't trust this person, we can't trust that person, we need help, we need this. And it was a mess. And it was not good because food was running out and it was a starving time for this colony. They were like barely hanging on, and probably the only reasons that they could was some of those trades that they were able to take place, procured, happen with the natives or the little bit that they did survive or save or bring back helped them that way. But one thing with Jamestown is that once it was established, others started to come as well. So it wasn't like it was a one and done settlement. People kept coming to Jamestown to restock. So once those other settlers arrived and people realized what could take place, that is when it became a very profitable, aka John Rolfe taking huge advantage of the tobacco situation right there. And so as we analyze Jamestown, another very famous early settlement for the British was Plymouth. The good old Mayflower. We've heard this story a million times at Thanksgiving. Fun fact, the first Thanksgiving does not go how people were told. Abraham Lincoln, in a time where unification or the country coming together so that we would not be split apart, told the story how it is like we hear today to make sure or to help people understand that we're together. There's a togetherness. We're unified instead of the kind of actual events that took place. He changed the story a little bit. Now, they still got together, as you can see in that picture, and traded goods and worked together and like helped each other. But it wasn't the all buddy buddy like the stories sometimes go. So why did the Pilgrims leave England in the first place? Well, religious freedoms was that big one. All right. The Church of England, the idea of how you should worship, who you should worship, what to worship was a question mark for the people. And they used that as a chance to leave. They're like, it is time to get out of here, time to start anew. And it was the colony of Plymouth that the Pilgrims used for it. New lives, fresh starts were other people's reasons. It's new opportunities, like we talked about before. And they left. Now, they were left like 3 different times because of all the troubled seas and back and forth. It was not the smoothest start to their sails, but they finally landed in Plymouth, Massachusetts in 1620. Fun fact, they were supposed to land down in Virginia. But those rough seas that started their adventure finished off by pushing them a lot further north, and they wrote the Mayflower Compact. Now, the Mayflower Compact was signed in November 21st, 1620, and it was the first framework of government written in the area of what would become the United States. So the very first governmental documents was this compact by the settlers because they weren't where they were supposed to be. They've realized, like, hey, if we're going to be here, we got to make sure we do this correctly. It laid out what they believed was their rights, what they believed they should do and work on and all that stuff. And it was only about 200 words. So it wasn't this long, drawn out document. It was the quick to the point that they all signed before they went from the boat to the land. So it was that document that was not a constitution, but more of a civil body that started off government practices in the area of the United States. So, like I talked about earlier, the first Thanksgiving worked with the Pilgrims and the Native Americans, and they weren't buddy-buddy like the story always go, but they did help each other because that first winter that the Pilgrims landed on was extremely, extremely harsh. Like, it was not good at all for these people. And so they relied on the Wampanoag Indians, whose land they landed on, to kind of trade with, work with, and allow each other to help out. And so they met Samoset who spoke English and introduced himself and was able to kind of start the conversations. They met Tisquantum, who also learned more, had more English, and so they were able to get that trade and go. And as the colony grew, it, like I said, it was tense, but it wasn't bad tense, and it wasn't, oh my goodness, this should like not take place. But it did end up in kind of like that harsh failing, especially once King Philip's War broke out. So they kind of broke the mode on the original, like, nope, we don't like each other type of thing. But they did eventually have those not so good relations. Orange. Oh, there we go. Now I remember this slide. So the Renaissance was all about rebirth, renewing ideas. The Age of Exploration added even more ideas. And now people are looking at their own lives and like, can things be changed? Do I have to follow this MO? Or can we kind of shift it? And the big thing that happened was in religion. And the 30 Years' War is kind of what kicked it off. It was Catholics versus Protestants because they had that, wait a second, just because this was the only way that it's been done for years, is it the only way that we have to? And or should we allow new ideas and stuff like that? Back and forth, back and forth. King Ferdinand II wanted to impose his Catholic doctrine on all of his subjects. And that's where it starts off in 1618. He eventually wins his war and kind of settles down different disputes, settles down uprising, rebellion, stuff like that. And now all of a sudden, another king wants to rearrange. Another group is like, wait a second, we want to rethink these life, rethink these ideas. And more rulers begun their attack to promote their religion, or different religious leaders talked about like, nope, we can't do this. We got to rearrange it. And it wasn't one war. One war did not last 30 years, but it was a bunch of little ones adding up. And the thing that ended it all was the Treaty of Westphalia. That was the last treaty to end these wars that kind of just like, enough's enough. We've done this way too long. Let's get to work. And they moved on. Speaking of war, it's all about wondering not just religion, but government as well. So who's in charge? So the religious time talked about the different ways of worshiping God and all that stuff, whereas the English Civil War really analyzed, do we need a king? King Charles I was ruling, and he disbanded Parliament, started ruling by decree, and imposed taxes, aka things normal citizens do not like because they lose a lot of their power. And once again, the Church of England is starting to shift and change, and Catholic versus Protestant, Catholics versus different ideas of Christianity were butting heads. And it was like a series of 3 wars that really culminated all of this. The First Civil War, Royalists and Separatists fought. Scottish help the Separatists win, and King Charles I is kicked out. Like, they literally raise up and kick out the king. Big thanks to Oliver Cromwell. With the Second Civil War, they bring Charles back. So it's like, no, we don't want you. Well, now we want you back to his throne. And then a few years after it ended, or like all this whole mess started, they execute Charles I. So in 1649, they killed the king that they brought back from exile because they exiled him from the First Civil War. And his son, Charles II, was made King of the Scots. Well, Oliver Cromwell led forces, one, removing the crown from power once again. And in 1660, Cromwell is removed and the king is brought back. Now, when I was researching this and trying to determine what to discuss with this, it goes into so many different avenues and looks at it. So for your discussion post, if you want to analyze this event of the 1600s, go for it. There's so much more to it. I just wanted to give you a little taste and a little analyzation of what it was. And that is this week's lesson. As you can see, next week we are going to talk about the people, one of them being Oliver Cromwell, Louis XIV, the Sun King, and so many more go into place. So take a look at the discussion post, answer that fully, reply to 2 people. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. But otherwise, have fun and good luck.